Welcome to my classroom. My name is Brenda Hussein. I've been teaching English for a long time, and I've learned some of the tricks that help students learn it faster. Grammar is so hard to learn in a second language. Sometimes even in your own language, it's hard. But I've come up with some ways to make it easy. Easier, but really easy. I think you will be surprised as you're watching this video that some of the things you thought were too hard to learn are actually very easy to learn the way I do it. So I want to help you with that. The first thing I want you to know on this video called Making Grammar Easy is that this is not all the grammar of the English language. It's the foundation, it's the basics, it's the first things you need to learn to make all the other grammars easier. So it's not everything, and it's not every rule, and it's not every exception, but you'll see that it is the foundation, the beginnings. The other thing I want you to know about this video is that there are handouts that I've created for you to take notes and to follow as we're going along. They're all on a file right here on this DVD for you to copy as much as you like. Nothing is copywritten by law, but my name is on all the things that I've made. And I want you to make sure you open that file first and look at the things that are there, because as we begin, you need to have some of these papers available to you to start taking notes. So maybe you should check out the file first before we start learning our grammar. Let's get started. All right, it's time to begin. If you're going to learn English grammar, you have to learn the parts of speech first. What's a part of speech? Well, every word we say is one of the parts of speech. So what are the parts of speech? You probably know a few of them, but do you know how many there are? A lot of my students don't. There are 8. That's right, 8, and here they are. You probably knew some of these: noun, verb, pronoun, adjective, adverb, preposition, conjunction, and interjection. Probably this one is the one you're not sure about. Don't worry, we'll get to all of them eventually. So let's start with each one. We're here to do a simple overview here. Not all the details, just a simple overview. Noun. Do you know what a noun is? It's the name of anything. We say it's the name of a person, a place, a thing, or an idea. Maybe you knew those first 3, but you've never heard that 4th one. So a person, any person. And don't forget, in English, when we say a person, we can say teacher. That doesn't have a capital letter. But if we say Ms. Hussein, that has capital letters. If we say city, that doesn't have a capital letter. But if we say San Francisco, capital letters. So in the English language, we only put capital letters on nouns that are specific names of things, not general names. Other languages put a capital on every noun. We don't do that in English. But what about this idea? I know you can name lots of persons, places, and things, but what's an idea? Anything you can have in your head or in your heart, like a feeling. A feeling, emotion, love, anger, joy. Do you know that word, joy? Happiness. Those things are ideas. Or you can have an idea in your head. You can have a thought. You can have a dream. You can have an imagination. So a noun can be any one of these 4 things. Most of my students have no problem with nouns. So let's go on to the word verb. What's a verb? The students will say, it's an action. You're absolutely right. But watch. Why did I put number 1 by that? Because verbs can do 4 things. Not just action. There's 4 things they do. But for right now, we will just leave it at action and we'll come back to verbs later because we're going to be spending a lot of time on verbs in the English language. We'll come back to that in a while. So let's go on to this word, pronoun. First, do you see the word noun? Do you see it? So what is this? What is that? Do you know what pro means? This piece of a word is important. And when you're trying to learn English vocabulary, it's going to be good for you if you can start learning the pieces of English words. What's the main part of this word? Noun. Well, we already know what a noun is. But what is this other piece, pro? Have you ever heard the word prefix? I'm surprised how many of my students have never heard this word before. Prefix. What does fix mean? Maybe you say repair. Well, yes, but actually the word means attach. Do you know what pre means? Wait a minute, there's pre, there's pro. These are different prefixes and they have a different meaning. Do you know what pre means? Yes, you're right, it means before. So what does pro mean? Pro means for. So if we're thinking about pronouns, this is a word that takes the place of a noun. It stands for a noun. So what does pre mean? Pre means before, and fix means attach. So what is a prefix? It's a piece of a word we attach before another word. I think you probably know some more words like this. How about this prefix? Have you seen it? Maybe you know this word. Review. Wait a minute, I know view. View means to see. What does review? What does re mean? Re has a different meaning. It means again. So I know this word, view, and this piece means again. So what does review mean? To see it again. So what's happening when we put a prefix on a word? It's changing the meaning. So I want you to remember that. Most of the time, the prefixes, the pieces we attach at the beginning of a word, are changing the meaning of a word. Like this. You know review. Do you know another word that uses re? Let's see. Replay. Retest. Re means again. You see? So I know the word view. It means to see. But when I put the prefix on, it means to see again. You see? Prefixes change the meaning of a word. So that's the word prefix. But wait a minute. What about the pieces we put on the ends of words? Can you think of one? Well, we have some right here. Do you see this right here? Those are endings. Prepose, conjunct, interject. Those are words, but then we put these endings on them and we've changed something, but we haven't changed the meaning. Let me show you something over here. You see this word? What do you see here? Fix, same thing. But what does sub mean? It means after. So a suffix is a piece of a word we attach at the end of words. Does it do the same thing as a prefix? No, it does not. Let me show you an example. Do you know this word? Comfort. Comfort can be a verb, it can be a noun, but it means to feel good or to be feeling good. What if I put a piece on the end? You see this piece? You know that word. I think you've seen it. Comfortable. We call that a suffix. Did it change the meaning of the word? No, comfort means to feel good, and when I'm comfortable, I still feel good. The meaning is the same. What changed? The part of speech. So most of the time, when we put suffixes on words, it's changing the part of speech, but not the meaning. So let's say comfort is a verb, could be a verb or a noun. But when I put this on here, now it's an adjective. But the meaning is the same. You know, a suffix can't do anything but these four things. It can make a noun, it can make a verb, it can make an adjective, or an adverb. It can't do anything else. That's all they do. And I have a handout for you. So copy that and check it out, and you'll see some more suffixes, all right? Well, let's carry on. Adjective and adverb are next. Let's put that on the next clip and get ready for that. Now we know what prefixes and suffixes are. Let's go back to the word pronoun. Now we learned that pro means for, so these are the words that stand for a noun. I know you've heard these words before, but look at this list. I have a list here, a different one here, and a different one here. All of these words are called pronouns at times, but the list is a little different. Why do I have this and this written that way? Of course you know. These are singular and this is plural. Same thing is happening over here. Me, you, him, her, it, us, you, them. I, you, he, she, it, we, you, they. Singular, plural. Look at the word you. It's all over the place. Because you can be singular or plural. You, one person, or you, many people. So that's the one pronoun that can do a lot of things. But I'm asking you now, what's the difference between this list and this list? Do you know? Many of my students do not. Here it is. These pronouns can be used as subjects. And these pronouns can be used as objects. And that's the difference. This is really important if you're going to speak English correctly, because sometimes English speakers don't use these words correctly. So I want you to see what to do. If you've got a subject like this example, Dan and I, or Dan and he, or Dan and she, or Dan and they, or Dan and we, it has to come from this list if it's the subject. See, this sentence has two subjects. So if this blank is a subject and we need a pronoun, it has to come from this list. It cannot come from that list, because this list can be objects and only objects. Well, look over here at this example I did. He gave her and blank a ride. Okay, wait, time out. What's an object? Have you heard teachers in English say, that's an object, that's a direct object, that's an indirect object? Have you heard them say that? And sat there and wondered, what's an object? Well, I'm going to tell you. It's very easy. Every time in grammar you see the word object, it means the same thing. Every time. It means receiving action. An object is always a noun or a pronoun, and it's the person or thing that's receiving the action of the verb. So he, subject, gave, verb, her, she's receiving, and that blank is receiving. So the pronoun has to come from this list. You know the mistake that English speakers usually say, because they're trying to sound proper? They'll say, he gave her and I a ride. That's wrong. And everybody thinks it's right, and it's wrong. Why? Because it's an object. And if it's an object, it cannot come from this list. Got it? So what can we put in that blank? Well, anything from the object list. He gave her and me a ride. He gave her and him. And he gave her and them. He gave her and us. It just has to come from that object list. If it's an object, that's what it is. All right, what's an object? Every time you hear the word object in English grammar, it means the same thing. Receiving action. So you know what subjects are. That's the first thing you learn. If it's the subject of a sentence, it has to come from that list. If it's an object, it has to come from that list. And that's the difference. But wait a minute. There's another list down here. I know you've heard these words before too. My, mine, your, yours, his, her, its, and then his and hers, our, ours, their, theirs. What are these? We call these possessive pronouns. Possessive is a long word for some people. It means we use these to show I own something or he owns something. But there's a difference between them. But I'll tell you, it's an easy way to tell the difference. Listen, that's my car. That car is mine. Isn't that your book? That book is yours. This is his house. That house is his. This is the one that's the same on both sides. That's her house. That house is hers. You see when we put this S over here on this list? That's our classroom. That classroom is ours. That's their classroom. That classroom is theirs. What's happening here? Did you hear that every time I used these words, they were at the end? And every time I used these words, they were right before a noun. Did you hear it? Listen again. That's my car. That's your book. You hear that? Every time we use these, there's a noun after it. Because when we use these words, even though they're possessive pronouns, they actually act like adjectives. You know, we haven't gotten to the word adjective over here yet. That's the next thing. But I'll tell you right now, an adjective is always pointing at a noun. So that's when we use these. But what about these? That car is mine. That book is yours. There's nothing after it. There's no noun after it. That's because these are really, really, really acting like pronouns. These are acting like adjectives. And that's the difference. Not so hard, huh? Not so hard. Okay, next clip. Let's move on to the adjectives. Okay, now we know what pronouns are. Let's move on to our two describing words. These are the only words of our parts of speech that describe. Describe means they're always pointing at describing another word. How do I know the difference between an adjective and an adverb? An adjective describes a noun. These words describe nouns. They can't do anything else. Adjectives have no other business but describing or pointing at nouns. If you're confused about them, maybe you can ask yourself these questions. Which one, what kind, how many, and whose? An adjective will always answer one of those questions. What kind could be like describing a tree. What kind of tree is it? Oh, that's a pine tree, or that's an apple tree, or that's a An old tree. That's a young tree. Or a dead tree. Anything that is telling me what kind, that's an adjective. Well, and it can also say what color. Which one is it? Well, it's the red rose out there that I'm looking at. The red one. Well, which one is yours? Which car is yours? The silver one over there. Silver car. Colors, any description of a noun. So you should take some time just looking around your room, finding a noun and describing it. I like to pick out a noun. Garden. You know the word garden? Well, we have a beautiful garden where we are. Well, can you describe the garden? Beautiful garden. Did you hear that? It's a beautiful garden. There's another thing I want to tell you about adjectives. They describe nouns. Have you heard these words before? A, an, and the. Have you heard those words? Maybe you heard a teacher call those words articles. Well, yes, we call them articles. But I have a secret for you. They are always adjectives. They can't do anything else. Because every time you see a, an, and the in the English language, it's always pointing to a noun that's coming. Sometimes an adjective is coming and then the noun, but it's always pointing at that noun. I can say a tall tree. I can say a red car. So a, an, and the are always pointing at nouns. You've heard of articles before, but that's what they are. They're always adjectives. Well, if you want to practice with adverbs, those are a little more complicated. Do you see how I wrote the word verb? Because most students who have been studying their grammar, they can usually tell you that an adverb describes a verb. It's an easy way to see. See this? An adverb adds to the verb. And that's an easy way to remember it. But did you know it also describes adjectives sometimes? Or even other adverbs? Let me give you an example. You see these questions? How, when, where, how much? If it answers one of these questions, it's an adverb. If it answers one of these questions, it's an adjective. That's the difference. Well, let me give you an example here. How did she sing? Well, she sang really badly. When did she sing? She sang very often. Where did she sing? She sang everywhere. How much did she sing? Too much. Did you hear the words really and very and too? Really, very. How did she sing? When did she sing? Really? She sang really badly. Wait a second. Whoa, wait. What's badly? Badly is telling me how she sang, so that's describing the verb. She sang badly. But what's really? Really is describing the adverb that's describing the verb. So you see, sometimes adverbs describe other adverbs. How about this one? When did he sing? She sing. She sang very often. Very. Often is an adverb describing the verb. Sang often. But very is describing the adverb. So you can also use very to describe adjectives. You see this? How tall is that tree? Not very tall. Tall is an adjective. And very is describing the adjective. So yes, we do know adverbs as adding to the verb, describing the verb. But sometimes they also describe adjectives and adverbs. So how do you know? Is it answering one of these questions? It's an adverb. But it could be pointing at an adjective. It could be pointing at another adverb. And it could be describing the action, the verb. So those are our two describing words. Let's go on in the next section to these last three, and that won't take us very long. Wow, look what you've learned in just a few minutes. Nouns, verbs, pronouns, adjectives, and adverbs. That means we only have 3 to go to get our 8 parts of speech. So let's look at this word preposition. I know a lot of students who look at this long word and go, I don't know what that is exactly, but look, I'm going to break it down for you. Watch what we do here. You see this? Do you remember that from prefixes? Pre means before. So what's the rest of the word? Position. Oh, you know that word. What does it mean? Location. Most of our prepositions talk about location of where or when. Where or when. So I'm locating time or I'm locating my location. But these words are called preposition words. What are they prepositioning? Well, let me show you. You know these words over here: in, at, on, from, with, in front of, according to, beneath. Those are some of the prepositions in English. You know, some of the languages in the world, they maybe have 6 prepositions total in the whole language. In English, it's crazy. I could fill up this whole board and another one with prepositions from English and I wouldn't be finished. There's so many, I don't even know how many there are. But we do have a list of very, very common ones, and they're real easy to find. But that's not what I want to show you here. For learning your grammar, you need to know what these words are doing when you see them in a sentence. Whenever you see these words, they're never alone, right? Don't they usually have something right after it? Come on, you know what they say. In. Give me an example. In my house. Okay? At work or at my job. On the table. From class. When did you come from class? With my family. In front of what? In front of the class, in front of the car. According to my book, that means as my book says. Beneath. Do you know this is another word for under? Yeah, beneath the house, maybe. Beneath the table, beneath my desk. So every time you see these words, they're prepositions, but they're never alone. They always have something with them. What is it? Have you noticed what that last word always is? What is it? You see this? Do you see how these are always nouns? The name of something? It could be a pronoun too. You can say with him or with them. You can use pronouns too, but it's got to be a noun or a pronoun. These words are never alone. They always come with a noun. It could be 3 words, it could just be 2 words, but look at these 2. You may see 3 words here, but that's 1 preposition. You may see 2 words here, but it's 1 preposition. And it's always followed by a noun somewhere. Could be 4 or 5 words in there, but it's always followed by a noun. Now watch. I want to show you what these things do. In my class, I teach my students to mark these like this. What are these? This is a phrase. What's a phrase? Sometimes teachers use words and they don't tell you what they are. But in my class, I always explain. A phrase is a group of words. That's all it is. 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 8 words. It's a group of words. We have different kinds of phrases in grammar, but this is the most common phrase. It's called a preposition phrase because it always starts with a preposition and ends with a noun. It always starts with a preposition and ends with a noun. It's always that way. The first word's a preposition, the last word in the phrase is a noun. So now we're getting close to figuring out why we call these things prepositions. Well, here's that noun. That noun needs a place in a sentence, and the preposition is positioning it. Because you cannot just drop this phrase anywhere in a sentence, because if you drop it over here, it'll change the meaning than if you drop that phrase over there. So the preposition's job is to position that noun in the sentence for the correct meaning. That's why we call them prepositions. Got it? It's a long word, but it really does have a simple meaning. So one more thing I want to show you before we leave this part of speech. We will see them more later in later grammars. But you've got to learn this. That noun at the end of the phrase is called, maybe you have seen this. What does that mean? Grammar books will have the OP, but sometimes they don't tell you what it is. I'll tell you. It means object of the preposition. Now I just told you a few minutes ago what the word object always means in English grammar. Do you remember what it means? That's right, you wrote it in your notes. Receiver. It's receiving the action. Receiving. The action of what? Well, that's not a verb. This isn't that. Well, it's a preposition, and the preposition is positioning that noun. So that noun is like the passenger in a car, and the preposition is like the driver. So the phrase is the car. Here's the driver, the preposition, and here's the passenger, the noun. And the preposition is driving that noun to the right place in the sentence. You can look at it that way. But that's why we call that noun at the end is called the OP, or the object of the preposition. Sometimes you will see those words in a grammar book and you won't know what they're talking about. But now you know. Good? Well, that's prepositions. Remember, they always come in a phrase. 2 or 3 or more words is a phrase, preposition phrase. We won't spend very much time on the word conjunction or interjection, but I will tell you what they are. The word conjunction means joining words. You know them, like and, or, so, but. These are words that are connecting words or groups of words. We'll go into more detail at the end of this series on some conjunctions, and the ones that make us the craziest. But you already know the simple ones, and, but, or, nor, for. They join words or groups of words. But this is the one, interjection, that I think you probably, maybe you haven't ever heard of it. We don't usually have these in our grammar books because these are words in our language we use for strong or sudden feeling. Like this. Wow. Really? Oh, cool. Oh. Ouch. Those are interjections. And so they don't do anything in the sentence. They're not subjects, they're not objects, they're not describing anything. They're just there so that we can show strong or sudden feeling. So that's why grammar books don't really spend very much time on those words. But that's what they are. And we'll go back to the other words in the list later in our grammar lessons. Well, we got our 8 parts of speech down. Noun, verb, pronoun, adjective, adverb, preposition, conjunction, and interjection. Those are the 8 parts of speech. Every word we say in the English language is one of those 8 things. Now it's time to go back to the verb, because we're going to spend a lot of time learning the verbs of the English language, because verbs are the foundation of the whole language. Are you ready? Maybe you should take a break, because this is going to be fun. Well, We did an overview of the 8 parts of speech, and now it's time to go back to that verb, because the verb is the foundation of the grammar of the language. So let's take a look at it. The first thing we looked at before was verbs are action. Well, that's right, but that's not all they do. We actually have 4 things in the English language that verbs do. So I have them listed here. Let's look at each one by one. We said that a verb can show action. That's true. But that action can be mental or physical. Sometimes we forget that the action you do in your brain or in your heart, those are also action verbs, like think or dream or imagine, or the emotions like love, hate. Those are verbs. Those are actions you can do with your mind or your heart. Of course, we know what physical action is. Physical action is what you do with your body, any part of your body. See, hear, speak, sleep, run, walk. We know that already. So let's move on to the second one. The second thing verbs can do is show being. You've maybe heard your teacher say the word be verbs, but sometimes they don't stop and tell you what those are. So I listed all of them here for you. You've heard these verbs before, but I want you, if you're taking notes, I want you to write the list down just like I have it here, because there's a reason for it. Let's look at them. Am, is, are, was, were, be, being, been. That's right, been. Not been. That's a little British. We understand it when you say been, but we don't say that in the United States. American English is been, because being and being sounds too close. So that's why we separate them like that. So I have a question for you. Look at these first 5. When do we use am? I. We only use it with I. Is. Do you know when we use is? With he, she, or it. That's right. And are, again, that's present tense, but it's plural. Was, past, singular. Were, past, plural. But what about the word you? We always say you are or you were, even if I'm talking about one you or many you. So here's my question. These first 5, am, is, are, was, were, can you use those alone as the only verb word of a sentence? Think about it. Most of the time when I ask my classes that question, they say, no, you can't use it alone. And then they think, wait a minute, I am a teacher. We are in class. He is a good friend. Of course you can use these words alone as the only verb word of the sentence. They're be verbs. But you also think maybe the times we use other verbs with it. That will come later. But what about these 3 be verbs? Be, being, and been. Do you usually see those alone anywhere? No, you don't. You usually see them with other verbs, and that's the difference between these. We'll come back to the be verbs again later. So let's look now at number 3. Linking. Do you know what that word means? Linking means connecting, joining, connecting. So here's the list of linking verbs. Sometimes you don't see them all together in one place, but I put them all together in one place for you. Are you taking notes? Write them down this way. There's a reason. I'll show you in a minute what the reason is. But let's look at them. taste, feel, smell, sound, look, appear, seem, grow, become, get, remain, stay, keep. That's the linking verbs in the English language. Oh, wait a minute, I forgot. Did you know these can also link? What? What are you talking about? Well, let me show you that in a minute. Watch what happens here. Linking verbs. We call this list sometimes linking because sometimes they're action. How do I know which one? Well, let's look at these example sentences over here. I used the linking verb taste here, and I used the linking verb remain here. One of these sentences is action, and one is linking. Can you tell which one is linking? Well, look at the first one. The bread tasted fresh. Tasted is the verb, and my subject is bread. Again here, I tasted the bread. Same verb, subject. One is action and one is linking. I bet you found out which one is action. Yeah, the second one is action. Because in that case, the subject is doing this action to an object. Object. Oh, do you remember from the last tape, do you remember what object means? In English grammar, the word object always means receiving action. And that's what the bread is here. The word object, receiving action. So that means that this one's action, this one has to be linking. What is being linked? What is being connected? The subject is being connected to a word over here that describes the subject. The bread is fresh, the fresh bread. And what's connecting the subject with that adjective that describes it? This verb is connecting it. Well, tasted is an action verb. Well, not here. Does bread have a tongue? Can bread taste anything? No, of course not. So it's not action here, it's linking. The verb is connecting the subject to a word over here that describes it. Well, look down here. He remained in his room. He remained angry all day. Which one is action and which one is linking? The first one is action. This is an action he did. He remained where? In his room. He remained angry. Angry is describing the subject, and the verb is connecting them. This one's not action here. It's being connected with the adjective angry, describing the subject. So that's what linking verbs do. We call them sometimes linking because sometimes they're action. How do you know? Is the subject being connected to a word over here that describes it? Well, I told you these can also be linking. Well, listen to this sentence. He is a great student. Student, he, same person. What's connecting those two words? The be verb, is. So be verbs can also connect the subject to a word over there that is describing or renaming the subject. So we have a list of linking verbs, but be verbs can also link as well. So why did I write the list this way? Let me show you. When these three words are acting like linking verbs, they mean exactly the same thing. When these three are linking, they mean the same thing. When these three are linking, they mean the same thing. And that's why I wrote the list that way. Because look and appear and seem mean the same thing when they're linking. He looks happy. He seems happy. He appears happy. Same meaning. He remained in his room. He stayed in his room. He kept in his room all day. So when they're linking, he remained angry all day. He kept angry. He stayed angry. They can mean the same thing. So taste, feel, smell, sound, look, appear, seem, grow, become, get, remain, stay, keep. Those are the linking verbs in the English language. So far we've learned three things that the verb can do in English. Action, mental or physical, mind or heart or body. Being, be verbs. And the linking verbs, which we say sometimes linking because sometimes they're action. Now, this fourth and last thing that verbs can do is a big deal when you're learning English grammar. Do you see this word helping? But maybe you see this other word auxiliary. We say this two different ways in English. We say auxiliary or auxiliary. And it means helping or extra or backup. Maybe if you work on engines or electronic systems, then you will know this word because it usually means extra or backup or helping, support. And in grammar, this list of words that I'm going to show you in a minute, they call this list of words auxiliaries. Auxiliaries, but they're not all the same. Okay, are you ready? Let me show you what helping verbs mean. This group here is separate from this group for a very good reason. Let's look at these first. You know the verb have and has and had. You know this is present. This is present for he, she, it. And this is past. Same thing with do. Do, does, did. This is present. This is present for he, she, and it. And this is past, simple past. We call these words helping verbs or auxiliaries because we often use these words with other verbs. I'll show you that when I teach you the tenses later on. But that's why they're here on this list. They're helping verbs. They're common helping verbs. But this list over here is different. Maybe you've seen them before or heard them. Maybe you haven't. We have to look at these. They are verb words, but mostly they don't have time. Like these are present and past, and you can say future, will have, will do. But these words don't seem to have any time. They are verbs though. They're verbs. So what verb tense do you think is this? Should. You've heard this word before. Is this past or present or future? It's none of those things. It doesn't have time because this list of words is not really about time. It's about something else, like advice or maybe, not sure, or it's required, it's in order, you must do this. So these words are not always about time. Most of the time they have no time. They're about something else. So we have a different word for this list of things. We call them modals. Modals are different from other verbs because they don't have time. They're about something else. They're about other subjects. So let's look at them. Why do you think I put them together like this? Well, if you've learned some English, you know shall and will and going to are used for future, but for other things too. So why do they have time? Do they have time? Well, we use them for other reasons. We have other meanings for them. Like shall is very, very British, and you won't hear Americans or Westerners saying shall very much. We know the word and we understand it when you say it, but you're not going to hear the word shall in Western English and American English very much at all. But it means the same thing as will and going to. Yeah, we know we use that for future, it has time, but we also use it for other meanings. Like this one, try this. The phone's ringing. I'll get it. I'll get it. Does that mean future or does that mean volunteer? See? Modals have other meanings besides time. What about, will you help me with this? That's asking for help. That's not a future tense at all, but we use the word will. So that's what modals do. They have other meanings, not just about time. When I put them together, it means they share the same meaning. Like may and might. We use both of those modals to mean maybe. And we use must, have to, have got to, and had better. They all mean must. Then we have can, and that means able to, same meaning. So that's why they're listed together like this. But I have a little surprise for you. Maybe you've been studying English, and maybe you've studied a lot of books, and maybe modals always confused you. Well, I'm going to show you how easy they really are. It doesn't have to be hard. Here's the first surprise maybe for you. Many of my students are very surprised when I tell them this. You see this list? That's all the modals in the English language. There are no more. That's it. I know some of you out there are being surprised right now, and you're looking at that list, and you're looking at me, and you're thinking, oh, she missed something. No, I didn't miss anything. That really is all the modals in the English language. If you were thinking modals are really, really hard, well, first surprise, it's not a long list. And then when we figure out, well, why do they have so many lessons in grammar books about these words? Well, here's one reason. Should and ought to have two different meanings in our language. Would has 5. May means the same thing as might, but may also has a second meaning. Must has 2 meanings. Can has 3, and could has 5 different meanings. That's why it sounds a little complicated sometimes. We will come back to modals later on after we finish our verb tenses, and we'll see how modals work. But before we leave this list, let me show you some things you need to write down. See the word be here? And be, and down here, be. What does that mean? It means that those 3 modals always start with a be verb. They're the only 3 that do. The other modals don't have be verbs with them. Only those 3 do. So example, I know going to means will, or something I'm planning to do. So how do I put it in a sentence? We are going to go to the movies this weekend. We are going to go. Did you hear the be verb? I am going to go to the store. I am going to go to the store. You always have to put a be verb before that modal. So it's am, is, are, or will be, or you can say was and were with it too. How about supposed to? We are supposed to be in class early. We are supposed to be, I am supposed to go to the doctor later today. I have to use a be verb with it. And you can use the past with it. I was supposed to go to the doctor, but I got stuck in the traffic and I couldn't go. So you can use past be verbs with that too. What about able to? Again, same thing. He is able to run 5 kilometers. Well, he was able to run 5 kilometers when he was younger. But you see, you always have to put a be verb with it. Just those 3. And here's another thing. Maybe you've heard Americans saying these words. Maybe you've heard me say it already on this tape, because I say it all the time without even thinking. Have you heard this word before? Gonna. Uh-oh. You've been hearing Americans say gonna all the time and you didn't know what they were saying. They were saying the modal going to. They were saying the modal going to. Sometimes when my students are learning the modals going to, they're trying to think, when have I heard Americans say that? I never hear Americans say that word. Well, you're hearing it all the time. You're just hearing it as gonna. I'm gonna do this. We're gonna look at that. We're gonna go on to this. Gonna. We say it all the time. Surprise, it's a modal. Now, here's the secret. We don't write with those, not with professional writing. You might see it on texting, but we don't write the word gonna in professional writing. We use going to. We only say it, we don't really write it. Here's another one I think you've probably heard. Gotta. Have you heard us say gotta? It's the modal have got to. And we say it so fast and we stick it together. When we say it correctly, we say, I have got to go to the doctor next week. I have got to go to the doctor next week. I've got to go to the doctor next week. That's what you're hearing. And you didn't know it was this modal have got to. Gotta and gonna. These are some ways that Americans talk. They're using a modal, but they're changing it only for speaking, okay? So sometimes you hear, I've got to go to the doctor. I'm going to go to the store after that. What? If you can train your ears to hear gotta and gonna, you will understand the Americans you're listening to a little better. Now, before we leave this list and move on, we will come back to modals later. I want to teach you the number one rule about modals. This number one rule, and we never change it. When we use a modal, what comes after it? What's the very next word after it? We never change this rule. After a modal, verb 1. Do you know what verb 1 means? Oh, I'm getting ready to tell you that in a little bit. But verb 1 is the simple form of the verb. The first verb form. You heard me say, I'm going to go to the doctor. Going to, go. Did you hear verb 1? How about even with gotta? I've gotta go to the store. Even when we say gotta and gonna, the next word is always verb 1, simple form. We never break that rule with modals. Every time you hear a modal, the next word is the simple form, or what I call verb 1. So, 5 meanings, 2 meanings, modals. We'll come back to those later and we'll learn a lot more details about it. But now, it's time to move on and start learning our verb tenses. Before we start the next section, I want you to find this handout on the DVD and make a copy if you can. If you cannot, set your notes up. It's this verb tense chart. I hope you can see it. It's got present, all the tenses on it. If you can make a copy of this and get it ready for the next section, that's what we're getting ready to do. All right? All right, did you get a copy of this or make one in your notes? Let me encourage you, when you're watching this DVD, please take notes. If you're trying to learn the English language and get your grammar correct, you really need to write this down with your own hand. It actually helps you learn faster and better. And that's why I have not made electronic reproductions of all of this. I want you to write it. It's part of the learning process. So, if you got a copy or you made one in your notes, good. We're going to start on the back of this. And when we're finished getting the foundation ready, then we're going to turn it over and learn our tenses. So let's start with verbs. How many forms does every English verb have, except for modals, of course? How many forms does every English verb have? I'm listening. Most of my students say 3. You know why they say 3? It's because of charts like this. They're very common. Every grammar book you see in English books, everyone has a chart like this. And if you can see, it's got a long list of verbs, and there's 1 form and 2 forms and 3 forms, and you see they call it simple form, simple past, and past participle. I bet you've heard those words before, right? You can get a chart like this in just about any grammar book. Even if you have a computer, you can find them online. They're always listed like this. And this is why I think students usually tell me, "Teacher, there's 3 forms of English verbs." Well, I have a little surprise for you again. There aren't 3. There are 5. What? Listen, you know this, you just don't know that you know it. Now watch what happens. We're going to do the 5 forms of English verbs. Let's start with the verb see, because it's really a common first verb people learn. So let's do verb 1. You know that. What's verb 2? Yeah, you know that. What's verb 3? You knew that. What's verb 4? Now you're getting stuck. What verb? I've never heard this before. I know, but I did this so that I can make it easier for you. What's verb 4? Oh, the ing form. Yeah, see, you know that. Now what's verb 5? You don't know, but you do. You've seen it before. Look. Oh, yeah. Yeah, you know these words, but the difference is you've never seen them all together like that. In my classroom, I've learned that if I throw teacher words at my students, it just makes them more confused. So every chance I get, I try to throw out the teacher words. And one of my most unfavorite teacher words is the word participle. I know you've heard it. Maybe you've heard English books or your teachers say, this is the past participle. Now I know what a participle is, but I've never been able to figure out that word. I think it's a crazy teacher word. So in my class, it's not allowed, but I'll show you why. Maybe you've even heard people call this one present participle. Have you heard that? Now I'm going to show you why I don't allow these words in my classroom. I'm going to write a verb on the board, and I want you to tell me what time it is. Is it past or present or future? Okay. Is that past or present or future? I hear all of you out there going, past. Are you sure? Here's your first lesson in verb tenses. The first word tells you the time, not the last word. Now, some of you already know this is the past participle, or what people have always called the past participle. In my class, it's verb 3. Isn't that easier than past participle? It's so much easier to say verb 1, verb 2, verb 3, verb 4, verb 5. I got it. What's this participle stuff? Because the students know this is called a past participle, they think that every time they see it, it's past tense. Wrong. Big surprise. I have a big surprise for you. Because this is a bad name for this verb, and this is a bad name for this verb, they're not allowed in my class. We say verb 1, verb 2, verb 3, verb 4, verb 5. And here's another surprise. These two verbs do not have any time. They're not past, they're not present, and they're not future. They have no time at all. Now wait a minute. Does this one have time? Yes, you know that's present tense. Oh, and this one is also present tense for he, she, and it. You already knew that, right? How about this one? Does that one have time? Yes, it's simple past. But what's the time of this one? No time. No time. Verb 3 and 4 have no time. So for us to call it a past participle or a present participle, it's a bad name. And it's not allowed in my class. So you come with me and let's get used to saying verb 1, verb 2, verb 3, verb 4, verb 5. Let me give you another test. Are you ready? Is this past or present or future? You got it this time. The first word tells you the time. This is a past tense. Look, this is a present tense. Verb 3 has no time. Verb 4 has no time. The time of the verb is always the first word. You got that? Okay, so now we're ready to go on. So if every English verb has 5 forms, not 3, 5, then why do we only see 3 on these charts that we see in grammar books? I'm going to tell you that in just a minute. All right, before we do that, let's go to regular and irregular. Regular and irregular. Do you know those words? Is this one irregular? Yes, this is an irregular verb. So give me one that's regular. All right, let me give you one. How about this one? Play, played, played, playing, plays. Did you do that with me? Verb 1, verb 2, verb 3, verb 4, verb 5. Do you know another one that's regular? Okay, work. Come on, do it with me. Worked, worked, working, works. Why do we call these regular and these irregular? Regular means normal. Irregular means not normal. So why are these normal? Let me show you why. See the ed, ing, s? Ed, ing, s. Did we change the spelling of the verb? No, we didn't. We just added ed or ing or s, but we didn't change the spelling of the verb. But look at this one over here. Do you see ed? No. Did we change the spelling? Yes. That's why we call them irregular. Now, you can think of some more irregular verbs, right? Let's do this one. Write some down for me. Break, broke, broken, breaking, and breaks. I heard somebody out there. I heard you. When we got here, we went break, broke, broken, broking, That's why we have to practice. Let's do one more, and then I'm going to show you the secret of the irregulars, okay? One more. How about eat? Eat, ate, eaten, eating, and eats. Your question was, if there are 5 forms, why do we only see 3 on these lists? In all the grammar books, it's the same. Why are there only 3? I'm going to show you. Look at these irregular verbs. Where do they go irregular? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Where are they irregular? The spelling goes crazy. Did you see it? Did you see it? The spelling goes crazy in verb 2 and verb 3. Wait a minute, look at 4. Is that irregular? No, it's just like verb 1 with just ing. Same thing here. You see? Irregular verbs are always regular in 4 and 5. Let me say that again. Irregular verbs are always regular in 4 and 5. That's why you never see them on these lists, because they're regular. If you know verb 1, you know 4 and 5. They don't change. They're like the regular verbs. See, look at this. Look at 4 and 5. Working, playing, seeing, breaking, eating. It's the same. The only thing that goes irregular is verb 2 and 3. And that's why they do these charts with verb 1, verb 2, and verb 3 on them. Because they're crazy. Because English is crazy, you know. And we have to practice them, because you have to learn how to spell them and how to say them. That's why we make these lists of irregular verbs. But they're only irregular in 2 and 3. So here's what I show my students to do. We're going to say all 5 forms of every verb we practice. But watch what happens. Let's do break. Break, broke, broken, breaking, breaks. All right, let's try another one. We get our list out. Even though there's 3 forms here, I'm still going to say all 5. And I want you to practice this. This takes a lot of practice, and you're going to have to do it to get your grammar correct. Let's do build. Build, built, built, building, builds. Let's do another one. Fly. Fly, flew, flown, flying, flies. If you get lost after verb 3, I want to show you a little trick. You say verb 1, verb 2, verb 3. They're usually on the list for you. But 4 and 5 go back to 1. Did you see that? 4 and 5 go back to 1. Only 2 and 3 go crazy. So I showed that to children who are learning English. They remember that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 4 and 5 are always regular. They always go back to verb 1. Only 2 and 3 go crazy in irregular verbs. That's it. So let's do a couple of practices here. You ready? I'll just get you started, but when you turn the DVD off, you get your list out and you practice. Let's do one. Let's do blow. Blow, blew, blown, blowing, blows. Let's do come. Come, came, come, coming, comes. Drive. Drive, drove, driven, driving, drives. You see how you do it? 4 and 5 always go back to 1. Don't get lost. They always go back to 1. So if you're practicing your 5 forms of every English verb, that's good. But these lists that are in grammar books, remember, they're only the irregular verbs. So if you're looking, I don't know what the 5 forms of walk, what's verb 2, what's verb 3, I'm not sure. If it's not on this list, it's regular. Got it? How do we do regular? ED, ED, ING, S. All right? Well, if we know our 5 forms, we're just about ready to start learning what the tenses are. Now, when you turn this DVD off, you practice those 5 forms. Practice them a lot. It'll help you when we move forward. All right, did you get a copy or make a copy of this chart? It's time to go. This chart is the same thing that's on the board right now. So I made it big for us to work with. You see the 12 tenses of English. But wait a minute. Let's get some words down before we jump into this. Let's get some words down. First of all, the word tense. In English grammar, what does tense mean? Tense means time. In English grammar, time is present, past, future, present progressive, past perfect, all of those things. It's the time of the verb. Here's the second word you need to know. Perfect. In English grammar, what does perfect mean? Perfect means completed. Finished. Completed. So, if perfect means completed, then what does past perfect mean? Now, don't make it hard. It's not that hard. It's not that complicated. What does past perfect? Perfect means completed. So what does past perfect mean? Past completed. No, really, it's that easy. Don't make it so hard. It's really that easy. Don't be surprised. So what this means is something happened in the past and was finished in the past. No, really, it's that easy. Maybe you heard somebody explain it so much harder than that with all of these words and detail. It's not that hard. Take a breath. It's good. Okay, so if that's perfect, perfect means completed. What does future perfect mean? Come on, don't make it hard. Yeah, something is happening in the future and it will be finished sometime in the future. That's all it means. Don't make it complicated. It really is that simple, okay? Here's the third word you need to know. Progressive. Now, maybe you've heard the word continuous, because some grammar teachers use the word continuous for this word. But here where I work, we use the word progressive, and it doesn't matter. They mean the same thing. So I'm going to be using the word progressive, so don't get annoyed, all right? Progressive, what does that mean? It means continuing, but here's the key, for a while. Continuing for a while. For an amount of time. It means going and going and going for a while. It just means this thing happened and it continued for a while. How long? Well, we don't always say how long. It just means for a while. I might tell you how long, but that's not the point. The point is it just means for a while. So if progressive means for a while, Then what does past progressive mean? Yes, see, you're learning. You're making it not so hard. Something happened in the past and continued for a while in the past. Is it happening now? No, it's past. Something happened in the past and continued for a while in the past. See how easy this is? I know you're sitting out there thinking, I can't believe it's this easy. Well, it is. It's not that hard. So what does future progressive mean? Something will happen in the future and continue for a while in the future. It's really that easy. Are you surprised? Are you starting to think maybe I might be able to learn these tenses? You will be so surprised you'll learn them much faster than you thought. I had a student once tell me, "Teacher, I didn't think I could learn this in 6 months." And he learned it in 2 days. You can too. It's not that hard. So if you want to learn the tenses of English, you need to know those 3 words. Tense means the time of the verb. So when your teachers say verb tense, verb tense, verb tense, now you know what they're talking about. And when you say perfect, perfect means completed. Perfect means completed, done. And progressive means continuing for a while. Now, I want you to pick up your pencils or pens, and let's write on the chart. If I write something on this chart, you write it on your chart. All right? There's always a reason for what we're putting. You ready? Let's start. Oh, what are these numbers? Did somebody say 1.5? Someone in my class always says 1.5. Now think, what did we just do before this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The 5 forms of every English verb. That's what these numbers are. The numbers are telling me that I use verb 1 and verb 5 with this tense. I use verb 2 with this tense. And I use verb 1 here. So let's finish the numbers, okay? Finish the numbers. Yes, you see verb 3 here. You see verb 4 here. And you see 3 and 4, 3 and 4, 3 and 4. Did you finish? I know what you're already thinking. You're thinking, I cannot learn those. That's going to be way too hard. Now wait a minute. So far, have I made it easier than you thought? We're not done. We're not done. I'll explain that to you in a minute. So where do you see the 5 forms? Are they all here? Yes. Here's 1. Here's 2. Here's 3. Here's 4. And here's 5. All 5 are here. There are 5 forms to every English verb. Well, I have a secret to tell you. Remember when we were looking at perfect and progressive? I'm going to give you a secret. Every time you see perfect, it's verb 3. Every time you see perfect, it's verb 3. And every time you see progressive, it's verb 4. Look at the chart. Every time you see progressive, we have a verb 4. Even over here where it says perfect progressive, perfect progressive, perfect progressive, we're going to have a verb 3 and we're going to have a verb 4. So every time you see perfect, it's a verb 3. And every time you see progressive, It's a verb 4. What does perfect mean? Completed. What does progressive mean? Continuing for a while. So far, are you okay? You got it? All right. We're going to practice with one verb on this chart. Are you ready to write? We're going to write with the word drive. D-R-I-V-E, drive. And we're going to use it because it's irregular. Drive, drove, driven, driving, drives. And we're going to put all 12 tenses up here first, and then I'm going to show you a secret about them. Are you ready? Let's write it together. Okay, did you write them all down? I'll give you a second to look, check to see if you wrote them correctly. Drive, drives. Here's verb 1 and verb 5. Drove, verb 2. Will drive. Don't forget to put will have, will be, and will have been with these. Don't ever write the last word alone. The whole verb is all three or all the words. Present perfect, have driven or has driven. Do you remember when we use has? He, she, it. Had driven, past perfect. Will have driven, future perfect. Am driving, is driving, are driving. Was driving, were driving. Will be driving, future progressive. Have been driving, has been driving. Had been driving. Will have been driving. This one looks scary, doesn't it? There's 4 words and it's one verb tense. Yes, that's true. I want you to get used to this. A verb tense can have 2 or 3 or 4 words in it, and it's still just one verb. All right? So don't forget the first word. What did I tell you in the last segment? What tells us the time? That's right. The first word tells you the time. Now look at this. I have verb 4 in present, in past, and in future. Over here too. And I have verb 3 in present, and past, and future. Now do you see why the word past participle is a really bad name for verb 3? It's verb 3. We use it in present, past, and future tenses. Why are we calling it a past participle? It's not a good name, and remember, we already threw it out. So, did you write them all correctly? Let me show you something real quick. Look over here. It's the be verbs again, right? Now, in the last segment, we learned verb 1, verb 2, verb 3, verb 4, verb 5. What are the 5 forms in the be verbs? What's verb 1 of the be verbs? No, it's not am. Let's do verb 1 of the be verbs. Verb 1 is be. Okay, now you're getting the idea. What's verb 2 of the be verbs? Verb 2 is always simple past. Here it is. Both of those are verb 2, simple past. Now you're catching on. What's verb 3 of the be verbs? What's verb 4? ing. Okay, this one's tricky. Verb 5 is always the S form, simple present for he, she, it. What's verb 5 of the be verbs? That's right. Just is. Those are the 5 forms of the be verbs. Why is that important? Because of the modals and the verb tenses we're going to be using. Remember about the modals? What's the number 1 rule about modals? After a modal, verb 1. We never break that rule. So if you want to use a modal, oh, and remember, will is a modal. So did we follow that rule with will? Even though will is all the future tenses, did we follow that rule? Will, verb 1. Will, verb 1. Will, be. Be is verb 1 of the be verbs. Don't forget that. And will, verb 1. Now, what's verb 3 of the be verbs? Been. You see been here? That's a be verb, but it's verb 3. Yeah? And it's in all of them. So it's always going to be have been, had been, will have been. And then a verb 4 after that. So far, so good? Now watch, I'm going to show you something. I want you to look everywhere you see a be verb up here. Everywhere you see a be verb. Where do you see them? Okay, here we go. Am, is, are. Here's was, were. Here's be. Where else do you see a be verb? Don't forget been. That's a be verb. It's verb 3, but it's a be verb. So everywhere you see a be verb, here, 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 and here, look carefully. What's the next word every time? Verb 4. Write that down. Am, is, are, was, were, or will be. What's the next word? Verb 4. Every time. So if you're trying to learn English and you've been saying, we are go to the movies. Are go? Why are you putting verb 1 after a be verb? We never do that in English. Maybe you heard someone say it that way and you heard it so many times, now you think it's right, but it's not. It's always wrong. Never put verb 1 after a be verb. We never do that in English. But if you have a be verb, the next word is usually verb 4. Until we get to the passive tenses, but that's not today, okay? So every time you see a be verb, the next word is verb 4, never verb 1. Now, one more clue. Everywhere you see have, has, had. Look at your chart. Everywhere you see have, has, had. Have, has, had, or will have. Look, where do you see it? Oh, I see it here. Have, has, had, and will have. And over here, have, has, had, and will have. Everywhere you see have, has, had, what's the next verb? Every time. What is it? Verb 3. So every time you see have, has, had, the next verb is verb 3. And that rule never changes. That rule never changes. You know we can say have, has, had alone. I can say, I have a red car. He had a blue book in class yesterday. We will have a good time. We can use those verbs alone, but every time you see another verb with it, it's always going to be verb 3 as the next one. So we've learned a couple of rules today that we don't break. After a modal, verb 1. After be verbs, verb 4. After have, has, had, verb 3. And we never break that rule. So if you see a verb after have, has, or had, and you're not sure what it is, it's verb 3. It's always going to be verb 3. So, if we can remember those rules, the next step now, we're going to learn what these verb tenses mean and how to use them. That's on the next section. I hope you're taking notes. Remember this? I hope you're already filling it up. We took some notes about verb 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just make sure you remember it. Let's try it. Remember? Let's do break. Break, broke, broken, breaking, breaks. Let's do fly. Fly, flew, flown, flying, flies. Remember? Verb 1, verb 2, verb 3, verb 4, verb 5. And then we looked at where those verb forms are on our verb chart. We've done all the 12 active tenses on the board, and now we're ready to see what these tenses actually mean. Verb 3 is always where it's perfect. Verb 4 is always where we see progressive. And over here, when we see perfect progressive, you see a verb 3 and a verb 4. Don't forget, been is verb 3 of the be verbs, and been is used in all of these tenses. You ready to find out what they mean now? Let's clear up some things maybe you were thinking that were wrong. Let's start with the present tense. Okay, what does present tense mean? Okay, most people say now. Well, I have a surprise for you. The present tense does not mean now. Let me give you an example. I'm going to use the present tense, and you tell me when this action is happening. Every day I go to class at 7:30. Every day I go to class at 7:30. I used go, present tense. When is that action happening? Right now? No. It happens every day. Another example. Every year I see my doctor. Every year I see my doctor. See, present tense. Is that happening right now? No. In our tenses, the present tense does not mean now. It means always. Write that down on your chart now, because I want you to remember this. If I write something up here on this chart, I want you to write it on your notes. The present tense means always. What is this? Or future? I'll show you that in just a minute. So we use verb 1, verb 5 for the present tense. Now we're going to do a timeline for every one of these tenses. Are you ready? Let's do the first one. Do you know what a timeline is? A timeline. This means now. This is future. This is past. So if the present tense does not mean now, it means always. Something I always do. Something I usually do. This is what the timeline looks like. Something you always do. So when you use the present tense, you can't use it without some reference to time. So you heard my examples. Every day I go to class at 7:30. Every year I see my doctor. How about this one? I usually get out of bed at 6 in the morning. Usually. See, those words are helping me understand that the present tense does not mean now. It means usually or always. It's my habit. Even if you make it negative, it's still always. We never go to that restaurant. We never go. That's something we always do. We never do that. So that's what the present tense means. So if the present tense doesn't mean now, then which tense means now? The present progressive. When we want to talk about things we are doing, did you hear me use present progressive? Are doing? Things we are doing right now, we use the present progressive. So your timeline should look like this. This is the tense that means now. But wait a minute. Future? What's going on here? Well, let me show you over here on this side of the board what I'm talking about with this future. I thought this is future. Why do I have it up here and up here? Well, the English language is a little bit crazy, and here's one of the ways it is. To say simple future, we have 4 ways to do that. Are you ready to take these notes? It's important. If I were you, I would write it on the back of this so you don't lose it. You ready? 4 ways to say future. In English. 1 is the simple future. And I'll use the verb arrive because I'm going to talk about an airplane arriving, okay? So will arrive is the first way we say future. The normal way we say future. Second way, the simple present. The plane arrives. So you can use verb 1 or verb 5 here. The plane arrives tomorrow at 8. The plane will arrive tomorrow at 8. They mean exactly the same thing. We use the simple present to mean future sometimes. So you can say arrives or arrive, verb 1. We will arrive tomorrow at 8. So the second way to use simple future is simple present. The third way is the present progressive. Am, is, are, arriving. Same example. The plane will arrive tomorrow at 8. The plane arrives tomorrow at 8. The plane is arriving tomorrow at 8. It means the same thing. And here's the fourth way we use the modal going to. All 4 of these mean simple future. Example, the plane will arrive tomorrow at 8. The plane arrives tomorrow at 8. We arrive tomorrow at 8. The plane is arriving tomorrow at 8. We are arriving tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. We are going to arrive tomorrow at 8. The plane is going to arrive tomorrow at 8. All 4 ways are the 4 ways we say simple future in English. You pick a verb and you try it, all right? So we've learned that the present and the present progressive are connected a little bit. They have one thing they share in common. They can both mean simple future. So now I want you to write something at the bottom of your chart, and I'll explain it to you in a minute. That's right, I'm writing best friends. So you write it on your chart, underneath the progressives and the simples. Best friends. Are you taking notes? I hope so. What does this mean? Best friends. When I say best friends, I mean that these tenses are best friends with these tenses. What are best friends? Best friends are close. They like the same things. They can sometimes talk about the exact same thing, the same action. So that's what we mean when we're saying the present is best friends with the present progressive. They're not exactly the same, but they share one thing. They can both mean future. The past is best friends with the past progressive. And the future is best friends with a future progressive. So how does that work? Well, let's do these timelines here. Most of our students know what past and future mean. So let's just write those down right now. The simple past means one action happened in the past. I'm not talking a lot of details about it. Example, last night I ate dinner early. Ate. Last week I drove to Dallas. I didn't tell you time. I didn't tell you details. I just put one action, simple action in the past. The same with the future. One simple action that will happen in the future. I'm going to eat tonight early. I'm going to eat early tonight. That's future, and I used going to. I will eat early tonight. I will do my work later today. Just a simple action in the future, no details. Most students know what these three tenses mean. But we want to look at their best friends because there's some other details with those. Let's do the timeline for the past progressive, the friend of the past. So I have one action in the past, but it's possible to have two actions. When I say two actions on these timelines, what am I talking about? I'm talking about a subject doing an action here and another subject doing an action over here, but they're in the same sentence. They're in the same sentence. I will show you the grammar of what that means in a little bit. But right now, when I put two X's on a timeline, that's what it means. It means a subject and verb is doing something here, and another subject and verb is here. But do you see? We're in the past. Do you remember what progressive means? Progressive means for a while, continuing for a while. So this first action is my past progressive, and it happens, and it goes on for a while. And then this second action happens. Here's an example. I was driving to Dallas when I had an accident. Oh no, I'm not driving anymore. Sometimes this second action stops the first action. Remember, progressive means for a while, so this is going on and on and on, and then the second action stopped it. I was driving to Dallas when I had an accident. So now you heard the word when, and you heard another subject and verb. So I want to give you my first hard word. Oh my goodness, what am I talking about here? Write it down and I'll show you. When. This tense also likes to use the word while and until. We can make two actions with this tense. The first action is the past progressive, and the second action, most of the time, is just verb to, simple past. Listen to my example again. I was driving to Dallas when I had an accident. Did you hear verb to? Why? This is an important rule. When we have past, the other verb has to be past. Past with past, past with past. Don't forget that rule. And when you do some examples, you practice writing your own examples. Remember, both tenses have to be past. This one is past progressive, and this one is simple past, most of the time. So that's that example. How are these two best friends? Well, you can say this action without a second action if you want to. It's not required for you to put a second action there. You can say it alone. Last week, I drove to Dallas. Last week, I was driving to Dallas. Where were you last Sunday? I was trying to call you. Oh, I was driving home. Did you hear a second action? No. You don't always have to put a second action here. But when you do, most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, it's simple past. Now, what about these other two words? When I'm using the progressive loves the word while. You know what the word while means, right? While means two things are happening at the same time. While means at the same time. So listen to my example. I was driving to Dallas while my friend was sleeping. I was driving to Dallas while my friend was sleeping. Was sleeping, that's past progressive too. This is the only time you can use past progressive and past progressive. Only with the word while. Because it means both actions were happening at the same time. While means at the same time. Do you have that? You want to make an example for yourself? Let's do another one. I was studying while my friend was making dinner. I was studying while my friend was making dinner. Two actions happening at the same time. Okay? Now, when. When means the first action was happening and something stopped it. What about this word until? Well, usually I use that one when there was a plan. I knew this second action was coming. I was planning on it. So let's do an example of that. I was studying until I went to dinner. That's not a surprise. It's not happening at the same time, but it's something I planned, a second action that was expected or planned. Got it? You want to make some examples for yourself? Please do that. Write some down, listen to the tape again, write them down, make some of your own examples. But remember, this is past progressive, and that's what it means. The heart word means that these time words, these are all time words, you see that? They like to go with that tense. They can go with other tenses sometimes, but they like to go with that tense. So you can use while, both actions can be progressive, or the second action can be simple past. But most of the time it's going to be simple past. So far, understand why these are best friends? They really can talk about the same action. It's just that this simple past doesn't usually give us many details. Time, how long did it take, when did you get there? When we say simple past, we don't talk about those details. We just say that's an action I did in the past. But when we come to the progressive, it can be the same action. But I want you to know a secret about the progressive. When English speakers use progressive tenses, we are focusing on time. It could be the exact same action. But when we say it in progressive, our minds and our focus is on how long did this take? How much time? I may not even say how much time, but when I say it in progressive, I'm focusing on time. Remember that, because we have 6 tenses that use progressive. So when English speakers, American English speakers, British English, it doesn't matter. We all use progressive. And when we do, we're focusing on time. So that's how these can be best friends. Same meaning? Yes, really. Same action? Yes. A little more information here. Well, let's look at the future. I can think of something I'm doing in the future. I will drive to Dallas next week. I will drive to Dallas next week. I can say, I will be driving to Dallas next week. What's the difference? Is that the same action? Yes. And that's how these tenses are best friends. They can talk about the same exact action, but with a little bit of detail. So when I say I will drive to Dallas next week, It's just one thing I'm planning to do in the future. But when I say I will be driving to Dallas next week, I'm thinking about time. That's usually what's happening. So let's do the timeline for this one. It's the same, it's just on the other side. Again, this is something that happens and goes on for a while in the future, and you can have a second action. Just like this one, you don't have to have a second action. Same thing in the future. You don't have to have a second action. But when you do, we're using the heart words again. What heart words like this one? The same ones. When, while, and until. Here's the difference. When I use when with this tense, it's not an interruption like this one is. In the past, when we use when, it's usually an interruption. I was sleeping when you called me. Interruption. I'm not sleeping anymore. I was driving when I had an accident. Interruption. I'm not driving anymore. And I didn't really expect it. But when we use when in the future, we're not thinking about an interruption. It hasn't happened yet. So when we talk about when, we talk about that time. When means at that time. You can say, I will be driving to Dallas when you call me. I know you're going to call me, and when you call me, I will be driving. That's what it means. But did you hear my example? I will be driving when you call me. Wait, whoa. What is that? That's simple present tense. You mean you're talking about the future and you're not saying, I will be driving when you will call me? No. You never put the future with the future. You always put the future with the present. Remember, the present can talk about the future. And we don't like to put two future tenses in a sentence. So we'll always, when we use the future tenses with another action, that second action will always be present. Remember this rule. It's a secret. The future loves the present. The future loves the present. The future loves the present. I usually make my students say that 5 times because they don't want to say it. And it's hard to remember. But don't forget that future tense, the second is always going to be present. So that's how it's a twin. You see how it's a twin, not a twin, a best friend with will drive? I can talk about a simple action in the future, and I can talk about the same action in the progressive, and I can use a second action with it. So that's how these tenses are best friends. They're close, they share the same things, they share the same time words that like to go. But let me stop here and talk about time words. I put hearts on these charts so you'll remember the time words that like these tenses the most. That's what I'm doing. What the heart means is this tense loves these time words. This tense loves these time words. We will be putting other hearts on these tenses, but that's what the heart means. The heart means the time words love that tense. And most of the time when you're writing with this tense, you should use those time words if you're using a second action. But don't we have other time words? Yes. And I'm going to take a break now so I can write those words down for you. We're going to see them in the other tenses we'll do in a minute. All right, time words. These are the words that you can use in the English language to make a time clause. What is that? I will be answering that question soon. But right now, I put the first 2 heart words, sets of heart words, on the chart. These are the other words that are used to make time clauses with these tenses. These tenses love these time words. So these are the words that can make a time clause. There are other words that you can use for time, like amount of time, like for, but they can't make a clause. I'll tell you why in a little bit. So let's look at this list first. The first two are very important, and you can use these with most of our tenses. But do you see what I wrote here? After does not mean future. And before does not mean past. In some languages it does, but when you come to English, those words do not mean future and past. They are always used in English when you're talking about two actions. This one comes before this one, and this one comes after this one. But both of those actions can be in the past, or both of those actions can be in the future, or even right now. So we use before and after in the past, and we use before and after in the future. So in the English language, these words don't mean future and past. So you have to remember that when you're using them. Let's look at the rest of these. We already put when down here. When is connected to this. Maybe you have heard this, as soon as or once. Wait a minute, once means one time, right? We use the word once a couple of different ways, and here's one of them. You can use it as a time word, but what does it mean? It means when. It means at that time. At that time. While and as means like. Well, in some other grammars it does, but you can use them. Remember I told you while means happening at the same time? While means at the same time. You can substitute the word as to mean the same thing sometimes. By the time, maybe you see three words there, but it's one time word. Think of that as one time word. Since is a very special time word. It's very limited in what it can do as a time word. It has another meaning too, but that's later. Until, till. This is just a short way to write the same time word here. You saw it already. As long as, so long as means the same thing, whenever and every time. That's what those words mean. They mean always. So we like these words when we're using simple present, because the simple present means always. And that's what these time words mean. The first time, the last time, the next time. Three words, but it's still one time word. You can use these words in different ways with different tenses. But when I put the heart words on the chart, I'm telling you the time words that especially like to be used with that tense. And it doesn't mean they can't go somewhere else. So before we continue with the timelines and the rest of our 6 tenses, I want to finish the hearts. Let's do the hearts. Write those down, and then we'll come back to each one of these tenses and I'll show you how we use them. Are you ready? The present perfect loves since. And the present perfect progressive as well. Are you taking notes? These two and these two like the same words. You can use before, by the time, and sometimes we even use the word when with these tenses. So you see the tenses that use the same ones. These 4 tenses like the same time words, the exact same time words. And since, where do you see since? Only with the present perfect, nowhere else. As a time word, it doesn't like other tenses. Please don't use it in the future. It doesn't work there. So since loves the present perfect, we're going to learn that in just a minute. Well, we've already covered 6 of the 12 tenses, the best friends. But now we're going to look at the last 6, and I have a big surprise for you. I know most of you watching this video were thinking, no way am I going to learn all of this. Well, I have a surprise for you. Do you see this? Go ahead, write it down on your chart. It's important. We learned that these tenses were best friends, but these tenses are twins. Twins? You know what twins are. They have mostly the same DNA. That means these tenses mean exactly the same thing. Really? Yes. I wouldn't lie to you. And it's always a surprise to my students when I tell them, when you have learned this, you already know this. When you have learned this tense, you already know this one. And when you've learned this one, you already know this one, because they're twins. The meaning is exactly the same. And I'm getting ready to show that to you with the first set of twins. So when I say present perfect, I always mean the twins. Because most of the time, you can change them out and it doesn't change anything. Remember what I told you about progressive? When English speakers speak in the progressive, what are they thinking about? Time. And remember what I told you the word perfect means? What does perfect mean in grammar? Perfect means completed, finished, done. So I can actually say the exact same action 2 ways. When I say it in perfect, I mean I'm focusing on this is finished, this is done work. When I'm saying the exact same action in progressive, I'm focusing on this is how long it took. This is time. And that's the difference between the tenses. There's also a small little difference, you know, just like twins. Twins can look almost exactly the same, but there are always these little tiny differences. It's the same with the twins in the verb tenses. The twins mean exactly the same thing, but these twins over here are a little more limited than this one. So let's learn what they mean. Let's start with the present perfect twins. First, I want you to look at perfect. Every time we see perfect, it's a verb 3. And we're going to use have and has. Remember, has is verb 5, and we use it with he, she, and it. So here's the timeline. Here's now and future. And you see the word since, because since loves the present perfect. Don't forget that. Since loves the present perfect. And we're also using the word for. For is not a time word, it's an amount of time word. And there's a difference. And you see this line going up to now because that's what the present perfect means. It means up to now. Or some of you like the word so far. That's what it means. The present perfect means so far. And we're talking about an action that started in the past. And so far, up to now, this is how much is finished. Remember what perfect means? Perfect means finished, completed. So right now, this much is completed. That's the meaning of the present perfect. And this is the twin. So it means exactly the same. Up to now, or so far. Now, do you see where I put the word since and where I put the word for? Let me give you an example. Let's look at this sentence over here. He has taught, did you hear the present perfect? Has with verb 3. He has taught for 15 years. Well, what does that mean? It means right now, today, how much is finished? How much? 15 years. Well, is he retiring today? No. And we're not even looking at the future, because the present perfect never even looks at the future. The present perfect is always about right now, finished. How much is finished right now? So this guy has been working for 15 years. He has worked for 15 years. Did you hear me say has been working? What? That's this tense. Watch. Has been teaching. You can use both and they exactly mean the same thing. They mean exactly the same thing. He has taught for 15 years. He has been teaching for 15 years. What is the difference? No difference. It means exactly the same thing, because these two tenses are twins. Now, do you see where I wrote the word since? Since is used when we use the beginning point. The beginning point. So if he has been teaching for 15 years, then he has been teaching since 2003. So we use since at the beginning point. We use for when we say the amount of time. Since, beginning point. For, amount of time. And that's the examples I have written for you here. He has taught for 15 years. He has taught since 2003. But there's another example. He has taught since 15 years ago. Yes, you can use the word since with the amount of time if you say ago. But you can't use ago with for. It doesn't go there. So since can be used for the point or the amount, but you have to say ago. Here's another example. They have worked for 10 hours. They have worked since 6 o'clock. They have worked since 10 hours ago. And again, what's the twin? Have been working. So you can do this too. Look at your verb tenses. That sheet has the verb 1, verb 2, verb 3 on it. You need to look at the verb 3s because we're using them here and in these two tenses. So you can try it yourself. Make some examples. Try all 3 times. We can say for, since, or since with ago, and make your own examples. I did 2 for you here. I want you to practice because this is an important verb tense. The confusion comes when students don't know how to say how much, because the present perfect can be used even when we're not talking about how long or an amount of time. You can use the present perfect for anything that's completed action right now. It was done or done for a while in the past, but now it's completed. And we're talking about now. That's why it's a present tense. For example, I have visited many countries. I have visited many countries. Well, is there something that is completed for how? No, there's no for how long. There's no how for how long. All I'm telling you is that there's some actions that I did in the past, and so far, many countries have been visited. That's it. That's what it means. So you can use the present perfect in different ways, and you don't have to use for, you don't have to use since. You can say it for different things. We have arrived. We have arrived. It means right now we're here. So far, that's what's happened. Now, we have 2 sets of twins left. And you might think these are the hard ones. Actually, they're not. They're a lot easier than some of these other tenses. So remember what perfect means? Completed, done. So what does past perfect mean? Past perfect means something happened in the past and was finished in the past. But with this tense and its twin, remember the twins mean exactly the same thing. With this tense, I really have to have 2 actions. We don't use this tense very much alone. Because when you say you had driven, you had worked, you had studied, you had run, we always mean that action happened before another one. And so if you don't use a second action with it, we're wondering, well, what happened after that? So that's why these 2 twins, these 2 sets of twins, most of the time you need to be using a second action. Now, with all of the other 8 tenses, you can use a second action and a time word or not. It's not required. But I would say, with these 2 sets of twins, you really need a second action. And don't forget our time words. Before, by the time, and when. Before, by the time, and when. It's the same on all 4 of these tenses, these 2 sets of twins. So what does past perfect mean? Past perfect means an action happened, 2 actions happened in the past. One happened first and was finished. That's the perfect part. This happened and was finished before the second action happened. Look at the tenses. The first action that happened is the past perfect, had with verb 3, because that's the first action that happened and then is finished before the second action. And what's the second action? Simple past, verb 2, just about all the time. We really don't change this, just verb 2. So 2 actions in the past, one happens and is finished before the second one happens. But both of them are past, not now, not future. Look at the example I have for you up here. He had studied grammar before he went to lunch. When you look at a sentence in English, I want you to start getting this habit down. When you read the whole sentence, read the whole sentence first, and then find the verbs. Find the verbs first. Most people find the subject first. That's not a good idea if you're learning English, because sometimes our subjects are at the end of the sentence. Sometimes they're in different places. So you always find the verb first. So we'll do that. He had studied grammar before he went to lunch. Verb, had studied. Oh, some of you just said studied, didn't you? Well, see, that's the bad habit some people have when they're trying to learn English. They just see that one word, and they don't see the word that's before it. That's part of the verb. And it's very important. Remember what I told you when I first started this section? The first word tells you the time. Always make sure you find the whole verb. Be careful, read carefully. So this is past perfect. And then you see before he went to lunch. Where's the verb? Oh, there's a second verb. Went. So here's my subject and verb here. Here's my subject and verb there. What does this mean? 2 actions are going on. He had studied grammar before he went to lunch. What are the 2 actions? Studying and go to lunch. Which one happened first? Studied. The studying was finished before he went to lunch. That's all past perfect means. That's it. So you can make some samples too, but remember, I told you there's a twin. Look at this. He had studied grammar before he went to lunch. You see the verb? That's the twin. He had been studying grammar for 2 hours before he went to lunch. There's the second one. It's the same action, right? It's exactly the same action. They're twins. So when I say it here, when I say it in perfect, I'm focusing on done, completed. But when I bring it over here and say it with the progressive, it's exactly the same action, the same thing happened. But when I use progressive, I'm focusing on for how long. Look at this. You see that? That's what this means. That red arrow I put on the timeline is required for these two tenses. You see there's one here too. And that's what it means. When I use this tense, I have to say for how long. You got it? You can't just say he had been studying grammar. We don't usually say that alone. We need some more information. Because whenever we use the progressive, we're focusing on time. And with these two tenses, you have to say the time. How long? So let me show you how these twins are a little different. I told you how twins are different. There's a little tiny bitty difference. They do mean exactly the same. But I want you to look at this example I wrote down. We had passed our test by the time we graduated. Oh, you see I'm using by the time and before? Do they mean different things? No. And with these tenses, before and by the time, exactly the same meaning. And even when you say when, it really is the same meaning. So it doesn't matter which one you use, they have the same meaning. Before and by the time. So, where's the verb? We had passed our test, subject, by the time we graduated. All right. Can I move this to the twin? That's written with this tense. We had passed our test by the time we graduated. What happened first? We passed our test, and then we graduated. Okay, the first action is done, and then the second action. But can I move this one to the twin like I did the first one? He had studied grammar. He had been studying grammar for 2 hours. Can I say we had passed our test? We had been passing our test. Does that work? No, it doesn't sound right. You know why? Because there are some verbs in the English language that you really can't use in progressive. You know why? Because you don't do it for an amount of time. You don't do it for a while. Here's another example. We had bought our car before we went on vacation. We had bought our car before we went on vacation. Can I say we had been buying our car for, it doesn't sound right. Because buying a car you do once, you don't continue to do it for a while. So, most actions you can say over here in the perfect. But when you move the action to the twins, you can only do that with actions that you can do for a while. And so those are the past perfect twins. Now let's look at the future perfect twins. It's really easy because they're exactly the same, it's just on the other side. You see, we have past perfect, 2 actions in the past, 2 actions in the future. And the rules are just about the same. The future perfect, there's 2 actions in the future. The first action is going to happen and be finished before the second action happens. So it's just like the past perfect, it's just in the future. It's exactly the same. So look at the example I gave you here for the future perfect. Let's read the sentence and find the verb. I will have driven to Dallas by the time I call my family. Before I call my family, when I call my family, it doesn't matter which one you use. It's a time word. Will have driven. This might be completely new to you, that when I tell you to underline a verb, I'm underlining 3 words, or sometimes 4. But remember, if the verb has 2 or 3 or 4 words, it's still just one verb. So when you're finding the verb, make sure you find all the words, because the first word tells you the time. That's the important part. So here's the future perfect. I will have driven to Dallas by the time I call my family, my friend. Do you see this? Present tense. I want you to look down here. Every time I have a future with another action, what is that second action? Present. Every time I have future with another action, present. Future, present. Remember, future loves the present. Future loves the present. Future loves the present. Don't forget that. Don't use past, and don't use future with it. All right? Now, it's just like this one, because when I move it to the twin, you have to tell me for how long. So I didn't write the second example, but I think you can probably do it now. Let's use will have been driving, and we have to say for how long. I will have driven to Dallas by the time I call my friend. I will have been driving for 4 hours by the time I call my friend. You have to say for how long in the future perfect, progressive. So do I have to say for how long here? You can if you want to, but it's not required in this twin. It's required over here. Do I have to say for how long here? You don't have to, but you can. You can say for how long anywhere you want. All right, this empty chart is full now, and I'm going to ask you to do something. Turn it over and put it down. I'm going to teach you now how to recognize any of those verb tenses when you see them in a sentence. Are you ready? I'm going to teach you how to read them now. Remember what I taught you. The first word tells you the time, and if you see verb 3, you say perfect, and if you see verb 4, you say progressive. All right? So first word tells you the time. You're going to say past or present or future. Then if you see verb 3, you say perfect. You see verb 4, you say progressive. If you see a verb 1, don't say anything. Are you ready? Let's try this. Future. Simple future. When you see verb 1, say nothing. Next one. Present. It's verb 3. What do you say? Perfect. Present perfect. Next one. Present. Progressive. That's verb 5. That's right, you remembered. It's verb 5. It's present tense. Past. Perfect. Future. Don't say anything when you see verb 1. Future. Progressive. Future. Oh, are you stuck here? You see the word read. If you'll check your list, I want to show you something. The verb read, verb 1, verb 2, verb 3, is exactly the same spelling. It looks like read, 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 but it's not. It's read, 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 reading, reads. So when you see this word, how do you know if it's verb 1 or 2 or 3? Remember what I told you? Look at the word before it. After have, has, had, always comes verb 3. So if you see have or has or had, the word after it is always verb 3. No exceptions. So let's read this tense. Future, perfect. Present. Did you remember this is verb 3? Been is verb 3. Let's say it. Present, perfect, progressive. Okay, ready? Future, perfect, progressive. Okay, you're getting pretty good at this. Caught. Okay, here's the problem again. Catch, caught, caught, catching, catches. So verb 2 and verb 3 are exactly the same. How do I know if it's verb 2 or verb 3? Do you see anything with it? No, because verb 2 is always alone. No other verbs with it. So you know this is simple past. What's this? Verb 1, present. Past, perfect. Future, progressive. Past, perfect, progressive. That's how you read all the tenses in English. But wait a minute, something's happening here. You see modals. And this is where my students always get nervous. No modals. I don't understand modals. I don't get it. I'm going to show you a big surprise. It's so much easier than you thought. Remember the list of modals we wrote down in our notes earlier on this DVD? That's all the modals. That's the first surprise. The first surprise was the list is kind of short. But now when you're looking at them with other verb words, now it's crazy. No, it's not. I'm going to show you a secret. The modal does not change the verb tense after it. Do you see this? The modal does not change the verb tense after it. So what do you see? Present, present perfect, present progressive. Now wait a minute. Present progressive on our chart starts with am, is, are, and then verb 4. What's happening here? Do you remember the number one rule about modals? The number one rule about modals is after a modal, verb 1. We never break that rule. Never. So we want to put present progressive after this modal, but we can't put am, is, are because they're not verb 1. Be is verb 1, so that's why it's here. But it's still present progressive. Present perfect progressive. All right. What do you see after these modals? Present, present perfect, present progressive, present perfect progressive. I have a secret for you. You see the present tenses on our chart? These are the 4 present tenses, the 4 past tenses, and the 4 future tenses, right? Guess what? You can never put anything after a modal except the 4 present tenses. And here they are. Present, present perfect, present progressive, and present perfect progressive. You will never see anything after any modal except the 4 present tenses. Why? Well, rule number 1. After a modal, verb 1. Verb 1, we're stuck in the present tenses. You can't go anywhere else. So it doesn't matter what modal it is, where it is in a sentence, you will never see anything after a modal but one of the 4 present tenses. I just made your life so much easier, and you thought this was hard. I told you, it's easier than you think. So the question is, if the modal doesn't change the verb tense after it, then what does it change? It changes the meaning in a sentence. It doesn't change the verb tense, but it changes the meaning in the sentence. Let me give you an example. Let's take the modal off. I have been visiting my grandparents. I have been visiting my grandparents. Am I visiting my grandparents? Yes, the action is happening. I have been visiting my grandparents. I would have been visiting my grandparents, but I couldn't get off of work. Did I visit my grandparents? No. What changed the meaning? The modal. Okay? I have taught all the grammar. I have taught all the grammar. Is it done? Yes, it's done. I could have taught all the grammar, but I ran out of time. Did it get done? Nope. What changed the meaning? The modal. So I want you to learn this right now about modals. Modals never change the tense after them, but they change the meaning in the sentence. That's all they do. But after the modal will only come the 4 present tenses. So you don't have to be confused. You know your tenses, and so you will always know what you see after a modal. Surprise! Congratulations! You now know all the 12 active tenses of English. This is an important foundation. But now I want to go to the sentences you might see these verb tenses in and show you another grammar. It's hard to learn this grammar until you learn those tenses. But now that you know them, it's time to move up and move on. Now the one thing I taught you is, when you see a sentence, what do you do first? Find the verb? No. Read the sentence. Read the whole thing so that you understand what's going on. Then find the verb first. All right, let's do it. He will get a good job after he graduates. Verb. Did you find the verb? Did you see that? That's not the verb. This is the verb. Make sure you're finding all the verb words. Do you see another verb? Graduates. So he graduates, he will get a good job. So in this sentence we have 2 subjects and 2 verbs. There's a subject and verb over here and another subject and verb over there. What's going on? Well, you read the whole sentence. Can you tell me what part of this sentence is the main part? The main part of the sentence. What do you think? The first part. You're right. This part right here, we call it the main clause. Okay, what's a clause? I promised to tell you. Look over here. Earlier on the DVD, I was showing you prepositions. And I showed you how a preposition is never alone. It always comes with a noun or a pronoun, and they act together like one thing. And I put parentheses around them because it's just a phrase. So what's a phrase? It's a group of words. Can be 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 words, doesn't matter, but just a group of words. And that group of words is acting together like one thing in the sentence. So I use the word clause now. What's the difference between a phrase and a clause? Here it is. A clause is a group of words with a subject and a verb. That's the difference. A clause has its own subject and verb. So now we have a subject and verb over here, but we have another one over here. This one we call the main clause. We call it the main clause because if we left off the other part, that part of the sentence will make complete sense. I can say, he will get a good job. And that makes sense. It's a good sentence. But if I say, after he graduates, can I say that alone? No. It needs this part of the sentence for its meaning. So it's the other clause, we call it. We have lots of different kinds of clauses in the English grammar, but the most important one for you to learn first is this kind. So when I mark a clause, I do it this way. Because the brackets show me that's not a phrase. Phrases we do like this. But the brackets tell me that's a clause. Why? Because it has its own subject and verb. A clause is a group of words that has its own subject and verb. Now this kind of clause relates to the verb tense chart you just finished. Remember the heart words? Is that one of them? You see these heart words? They're time words. Time, time, time. They're always about time. So we call this a time clause. Time clauses always start with a time word in that list that I gave you earlier. Those time words, before, after, by the time, when, while, until, as soon as long as, the next time, all of those words can start a time clause in English sentences. So that's a time clause. Let's look at the next sentence and find the clause. We had left the party before he arrived. Verb. Did you find the whole verb? Good. What tense is this? Come on, tell me. Past perfect. Okay. Do you see another verb? Past. All right. Where's the time clause? Did you find the time word? Mark it. Let's do the next one. I have worked here since I arrived last month. Verb. What tense is that? Present perfect. Do you see another verb? Yes. Where's the time clause? It starts with the time word. Okay, let's do the next one. This one's long. They will have been studying for 2 hours by the time they go to the gym. Verb. Oh, did you find the whole verb? What tense is this? Future, perfect, progressive. They. Mark your subjects so you don't forget them. Where's the time clause? No, that's not a time word that starts a clause. That's a phrase. That's a time phrase. It's not a clause. Do you know how we know it's not a clause? There's no subject and verb in there. It's just a phrase. Where's the clause? It starts with the time word. By the time they go. Remember, future loves the present. Don't forget that rule. Future loves the present. You want to say by the time they will go. No, don't do that. It's always wrong when you do that. Well, I've got another one here. She was watching TV while I made dinner. Verb. What verb tense is this? Past, progressive. Where's the other verb? Made. Where's the time clause? Find the time word. While. And the last one. It's a little different. Every time I see him, I say hello. Where's the first verb you see? And where's the other verb you see? I want to show you something. Where's the time clause? The time word. What's the time word? What happened here? Do you see this? Did you know you can switch the main clause and the time clause? That's what I did here. Let's do it up here with these. Let's switch. Switch. Just switch the order. After he graduates, he will get a good job. See how it works? Now when you switch the main clause and the time clause, it doesn't change the meaning and it doesn't change what the verbs should be. Let's switch this one. Before he arrived, we had left the party. Let's switch this one. Since I arrived last month, I have worked here. Let's switch this long one. By the time they go to the gym, they will have been studying for 2 hours. Let's switch this one. While I made dinner, she was watching TV. And this one is already switched, so let's switch it back. Start with the main clause. I say hello every time I see him. So now you've learned what a clause is. There are different kinds of clauses in English. There are if clauses, and they come next, and then there's noun clauses and adjective clauses. Lots of clauses. But every time you see the word clause, what is it? It's a group of words with its own subject and verb. And with time clauses and if clauses, you can switch them. So here's the rule. I drew an arrow here to show you a comma. When you switch and start with the time clause, that's when you put a comma. But when you start with the main clause, no comma. See my sentences here? There are no commas until I started with the time clause. You got it? You did a good job. We'll go on to the if clauses next. Clauses. We learned that a clause is a group of words that has its own subject and verb. And we learned that there's a main clause, the main part of the sentence, that can stand by itself. And then there's this other clause. And we learned that we called some of them time clauses. And this is what we found are the verb tenses that can be in time clause sentences. So in the time clause, you can have present or past or present or past. And over in the main clause, you can have the present, the past, the future, and present perfect. Remember when we learned the present perfect twins? Since loves the present perfect. So anytime you have present perfect with since, in the time clause with since is going to be verb to, simple past, every time. So we have 4 rules for these clauses. Now, I want to show you a different kind of clause. They're the if clauses. Now, in English, we have 4 basic rules for the if clauses. You may hear English speakers using if clauses in all kinds of ways that don't fit these 4 rules. Don't worry about it. This is the basic way that they work grammatically in the correct grammar. So I'll teach you the basic rules. If you hear something that doesn't go by the rules, well, it's just one of those crazy English exceptions. Or it's people using their grammar badly. But nonetheless, let's look at what we have here. First sentence. He always goes to the beach if he has time. I have taught you, always read the sentence completely before you look for anything. And the first thing you look for is the verb, not the subject. Look for the verb first. So what's the first verb you see? Goes. Did you think always was part of the verb? No, always is an adverb. Goes, present tense. Do you see another verb? Has. So here's my subject here, my subject here. And where's the if clause? Well, of course it starts with if, so that's pretty easy to find. Let's mark the if clauses. And here's this one. All right, there's the if clauses. Remember when we learned the time clauses, we learned that you can switch them with the main clause. You can do exactly the same thing with the if clause. And if you switch and start with the time clause or start with the if clause, that's when you put a comma. The same thing goes for the if clauses both times. So, what do you see as the first rule? Present, present. Wait a minute. That's the same thing as this one. Yes. And they basically mean the same thing. Present, present in any sentence with a clause like this usually means it's always true. Something that's always true. It's not a maybe, it's not a, well, it might, but no. If it's present, present, it's something that's always true. It just happens all the time. Remember what the simple present tense means? You were surprised when I showed you The simple present tense doesn't mean now. Present progressive means now. The simple present tense means always. Something that's usually true. Well, that happens when you have two present tenses in these clauses too. Same meaning. So look at the second meaning. We will visit my grandparents if they are home. What's the first verb you see? Future. Who? We will visit. What's the second verb you see? Are. They are. What's the second rule? Future. Oh, remember when I taught you all the future tenses on your verb tense chart? What did I tell you? The future loves the present. The future loves the present. You have to say it to remind yourself. But wait a minute. What's happening here? It's the same. So you learned these rules, and two of these four rules are just like the time clause. Present present and present future. So when you do present with the future in an if clause, remember if means this is a situation that has to be true or the other thing won't happen. That's what if clauses mean. And the tenses change because the meaning, the time changes for when this action is happening. So if you look at the first one, if he always goes to the beach if he has time, that means he always does this, present present. But what about this one? We will visit my grandparents if they are at home. So this is a condition that might happen, it's a maybe, in the future, now or in the future. So with this one, this one means maybe. Now or in the future. Maybe, now or in the future. That's what future present means. All right, let's go to these last two rules because they are different. They would wait for you if you hurried. Where's the first verb? Oh, did you say wait? And did you not see that modal? The modal would? Don't forget, modals are verbs. And every time you see it, it has to be part of the verb. Who would wait? They. That's how you find your subject. What's the second verb you see? Hurried. Who hurried? You hurried. Maybe that doesn't sound right to you. They would wait for you if you hurry, is what you might think sounds right. But that's not the rule. The rule for the third if clause rule is modal with the present tense. The if clause has to have past tense, verb to. That's the rule. So what does this sentence mean? What does this condition mean? If conditionals. Well, if this happens, if this happened, then this would happen. That's what it means. So they would wait for you if you hurried. Is this true now? No, it's not true now. Is it a condition that might happen now? No. These last two rules are situations that are not true. They're not real. And English teachers call them unreal conditions because they didn't happen. They didn't happen now, they haven't happened now, and they didn't happen in the past. So that's what's happening here. This didn't happen. So this is an unreal situation now. And what about this one? Look at this. I could have left early if I had finished my work. What's the first verb you see? Did you remember to include that? So you see modal with the present perfect after it. What's the second verb you see? Past perfect. So here's the fourth rule. I could have left early if I had finished my work. When did this happen? In the past. So this is an unreal situation that did not happen in the past. And that's why we're using a modal with the present perfect. And then past perfect. Past perfect, you remember, I taught you. The past perfect means an action happened in the past and was finished in the past. So both of these actions Didn't happen. So the question is, did I leave early? No, I didn't leave early. Why? Because I didn't finish my work. So I could have left early, but I didn't. Why? Because I didn't finish my work. If I had finished my work, I could have left early. So that's what if clauses mean. And they have 4 basic rules. 2 of them are unreal, means they're not happening now, not happening in the past. And the first 2 mean always or it's maybe. Maybe it will happen. So here are the rules. Present, 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 future, past, modal present, past perfect, modal present perfect. You're going to learn in a little while, I'm going to show you that every time we put the present perfect after a modal, almost every time, most of the time, we're talking about something in the past that didn't happen. So whenever you do a modal with the present perfect, we're usually thinking about the past. It sounds a little strange, but that's how it works. So I have all these rules for you on one of those handouts I promised you at the beginning of this series. It's there, and in a few minutes we're going to open those handouts and I'm going to show you how these rules and these rules are put on a piece of paper for you. But I want you to use these examples and practice your own if clauses. And don't forget, you can switch them. For example, if he has time, he always goes to the beach. If they are home, we will visit my grandparents. If you hurried, they would wait for you. If I had finished my work, I could have left early. So it's your turn to practice now, okay? All right, it's time. We're going to finish the verb tenses of English right now. The first thing I have to tell you is, remember, the word tense means time. And maybe you have heard some of your teachers say active and passive, or maybe you've heard them say passive voice. Maybe some teachers have even said passive tense. Why are they saying passive voice? Well, in my classroom, we don't say either one. We say the actives and the passives. Now, I taught you the actives already. That's the 12 tenses you saw on that chart. Well, I have a new chart for you, and it has all 20 of the English verb tenses, the actives and the passives. Why do people use passive voice when they're saying the passives and they don't like to say tense? Let me tell you why. The students get the idea that the passives are all new times, all new tenses. Well, big surprise, they're not. They're exactly the same tense. So we use voice because the time hasn't changed, but the subject has changed. So let me explain the difference between active and passive. Maybe you thought this was hard. You're going to be surprised, I think. It's not really that hard. So look up here with me. Active means the subject is doing the action. So you look at this sentence and it says, John threw the ball. Okay, verb, threw. Who did the action? John. John is the subject. John threw the ball. Who's receiving the action? The ball, object. Do you remember when I told you in English grammar, what does the word object always mean? It always means receiver, receiving the action. So every time we label something an object, it's receiving the action. All right? So John threw the ball. The ball is receiving the action. John is doing the action. But look at this sentence. The word passive means not doing anything. Not doing anything. The ball was thrown by John. What's the verb? Oh, maybe you haven't seen that before. Because when I taught you the actives, I showed you am, is, are, was, were, will be, verb 4. If you see a be verb, there's a verb 4 after it. Well, that's true in the actives. But now the big surprise is in the passives, every time you see a be verb, there's a verb 3. So that's how you can tell when you're reading verbs. If you see be, verb 4, active. If you see a be verb with verb 3, you're in the passive. So what does passive mean? Look at the sentence again. Was thrown. What was thrown? The ball. So wait a minute, the ball's not doing any action, but it's the subject. That's what passive means. The only difference between our actives and passives is who's doing and who's receiving in the subject position. That's all the difference. It's not a different time. If it's past perfect passive, it still means the same thing as the past perfect. If it's present passive, it still means the same thing as the simple present tense. The time meaning, the rules for the time that I taught you on the 12 actives, all of them mean exactly the same thing in the active and the passive. And see, that's why some teachers say the word passive voice, because they don't want to give you the idea that it's a different tense, a different time. It's not a different time, it's the same time. So if you hear someone saying passive voice, don't get confused. It's the same thing as someone saying passive tense, or in my class, we just say the passives. All right? It's the same time. So look at these sentences again. In this sentence, the subject is not doing, the subject's receiving, and that's why we had to change the verb. But who's doing the action? John is still doing the action. We have a different word for him. He's not the subject, but he's still doing the action. So we have a different word for him. We call him now the agent. If you've never seen the word agent before, it means something or someone that is doing the work for you. Usually that's what it means. And so in a passive sentence, the subject's receiving, and the agent is the one that's doing it, but he's not the subject. So to make it easy, what's the difference between active and passive? Active, subject doing. Passive, subject receiving. That's the only difference. Because the tense, the time of the action is exactly the same. If you look at these two sentences, you can tell. John threw the ball. The ball was thrown by John. Is that exactly the same action? Yes, it is. It's saying the same thing two different ways. So here's the next thing you need to know about passive. It's not that hard. Passive means the subject's receiving the action, not doing it. The other thing you have to know about passive is this. If you cannot have an object in an active sentence, you can't make it passive. Because if you don't have an object to move over to the subject, you can't make passive. You can't do it at all. So let's look at what the passives look like. You see the new chart that I gave you? Yeah, we're going to get it out. We're going to look at it together. But it's on the board now. So let's look at this chart. Here's your present, your active tenses, all the present tenses, all the past, 4 past tenses, and all the future tenses. 4, 4, and 4, just like we had before. You already learned all these actives. So now look where I put the passives. Why did I put the passives here? Because I want you to remember, they're not a different time. Remember when I wrote up here always or future? And I told you what it means. It means something that always happens, not happening now. Remember over here, when I put above there, I put now or future. The passives mean exactly the same thing, time, as the actives do. The only difference is subject doing or subject receiving. That's the only difference. And because the subject's not doing the action, we have to change the verb. So here's how we do it. Drive, am, is, are, driven. Was, were, driven. Will be, driven. Have, has, been driven. Had been driven. Will have been driven. Am, is, or are being driven. And was or were being driven. What's the first thing you see? Well, maybe you see a lot of things that are different. But what I want you to see is those threes. I put here verb 1 and verb 5, verb 3 on all the perfects, verb 4 on all the progressives, and verb 3 and verb 4 on these. But what do you see at the end of every passive verb? Verb 3. Now here's the next thing you need to see. When you see the verb 3 at the end, back up. What's the word right before it? Look at all of them. What's the word right before the verb 3? Did you see it? Yeah, it's a be verb. So now I have a new formula for you. Remember, all the be verbs, am, is, are, was, were, and will be. Being with the progressives. If you see a be verb, am, is, are, was, were, will be, verb 4 if it's active. Verb 3 if it's passive. All this information, if you're taking notes, good. But all this information that I'm showing you, I have it on a handout for you, and I'll be showing it to you in a few minutes. So the first thing we see about the passives is they all use verb 3, and they all have a be verb before the verb 3. So that's the first thing. But the next thing students see is, where's the passive? There's no passive here. The last 4 tenses have no passive. That's right, we don't use passive in those tenses. Let me tell you why. If we continue this here, the passive would sound like this. Will be being driven. Will be being driven. In English, we don't like to put 2 be verbs together like that. And so we just stop. We don't do passive over here because, look over here. If we did the passive here, it would be have been being driven. Have been being driven, had been being driven, will have been being. We're not going to put 2 be verbs together like that. And that's why there are only 8 passives, 12 actives, 8 passives, 20 verb forms in the English language, and now you see them all in one place. Isn't that great? I have a great handout for you I'm going to show you in a little while that puts all of this together for you. But I also included an empty practice sheet on this DVD so that you can print out the practice sheets and practice writing them all out. Because if you do that 3 or 4 times, you will remember your tenses every time with no problem. So let's look at a couple of other things. Remember I told you every time you see perfect, you see a verb 3. Every time you see perfect, verb 3. Look at the perfects. Perfect, passive. Passive is verb 3, perfect is verb 3. So look at this. Been driven, verb 3, verb 3. Been driven, been driven. Every time you see 2 verb 3s together like that, it's passive. It's passive, okay? And also I taught you every time you see progressive, verb 4 is progressive. Every time you see verb 4 is progressive. But I can do this in passive? Yeah, look, only these 2 do this. Here's your verb 4, being, and then a verb 3 after it. This is the only place in verb tenses where this happens, where there's a 4 and then a 3. It's the only time that happens. The rest of the time, it's pretty easy. But look at the difference between these. How do you know when it's active and when it's passive? Look at the difference between this. Will have been driving, will have been driven. What's the difference? Just the 4 and the 3. Again, same thing here. Had been driven, had been driving. The only difference is that verb at the end, verb 4 and verb 3. So these are the passives. You need to practice these a lot because when you're making a sentence, it kind of gets confusing. If you try to write with passive and you're not used to it, maybe you will start with an active verb and go, I was being driving, and you get confused. Try this. If you want to practice some passive sentences, try this. Start with an active sentence, like I did. Start with a simple active sentence that has an object. You have to have an object or you can't make passive. So start with a simple active sentence, make an object. Move the object to the subject and change the verb. Do that a few times and you'll get used to it. So let me warn you about one more thing before we leave the passives. One more thing. There are some verbs in the English language that can never be passive. And you can use your verb tense list that I gave you to go down the list and see, can I make this passive or not? Think about this. Here's a very common one. He came to class this morning. He came to class this morning. Do you hear an object? No, there's no object. You can't make it passive. Can you make come, came, come, have come, will come? Can you make come passive? No, because that verb can never take an object. Remember? An object is the noun or a pronoun that is receiving what the action is of the verb. But there's some of our verbs that don't do that. Here's another one that's very tricky that students always confuse. Rise. Rise and raise. Did you know those are two different verbs? Rise is what the sun does in the morning. The sun rises. Or you rise from a chair. It means to go up or get up. But can you do that action to something? No, it's just something that things or people do. So you can never make the verb rise passive. If it can't take an object, you can never make it passive. There are some verbs in our language like that, so you should look them up. If you want to know the teacher word for them, the teacher words call those transitive and intransitive. I don't like to use teacher words much, but if you hear them, I want you to know what they're talking about. A transitive verb is one like throw. It can take an object. Transitive means moving action to an object. So if it's a verb that can take an object and you can make it passive, we call it transitive. If it's a verb like go or come or rise that cannot take an object, we call them intransitive, means not transitive. You can't move the action to an object. Okay? So if you hear those words or see them, you'll understand what they mean. Time to move on. All right, it's time to learn gerunds and infinitives. We have been through a lot of grammar, and now it's time to learn these. Most students are a little nervous when they hear these words, gerund and infinitive. But just like most things I've been teaching you, it's actually easier than you think. So let's look first at this word gerund. Gerunds. It's always a verb for. That means the ing verb. But it's not acting like a verb. It's acting like a noun. It's not acting like a verb. So what can nouns do in a sentence? Well, a noun can be a subject. It can be an object or the object of a preposition. So here's an example. Swimming is my favorite sport. Remember what I taught you. What is the verb first? Find the verb. Did you say swimming? A lot of my students say swimming, but the verb is. So what is? What is my favorite sport? Swimming. You see, it's a verb for, but it isn't the verb. It's the subject of the sentence. Well, it can be an object too. Let's look at this sentence. I really like swimming. Verb. Like. Who likes? I like. What do I like? It's not part of the verb. It's the object. It's the thing I like. Object. So let's look at this last example. He always talks about swimming. Verb. Talks. Who talks? He talks. Now, what do you see here? Remember when I taught you prepositions earlier? That's a preposition. And we do this with preposition phrases. And what did I tell you a preposition always comes with? It always comes with a noun. But here, the noun is a verb for. So these are the three ways that a gerund can operate in a sentence. It can be a subject, it can be an object, or the object of a preposition. Those are the 4 ways it happens. I'll show you some example sentences for that later. But let's move over here to this part of the board where it says infinitives. Where infinitives are to with a verb 1 after it. Now wait a minute. Remember, we've seen to as a preposition, and this is always confusing at first until you know what you're looking at. If you see to with a noun, then it's a preposition. That noun is the object of a preposition. But the word to can also come with a verb 1 right after it. And when that happens, it's not a preposition, it's an infinitive. So what can infinitives do? An infinitive can act like a noun, an adjective, or an adverb in a sentence. But this is what's confusing. When students see an infinitive in a sentence, they think it's part of the verb, or they think that's the verb. Remember, if you see to and a verb 1, it's never the verb of the sentence. It's always acting like something else, a noun, an adjective, or an adverb. Most of the time we're looking at them as nouns. So when an infinitive is a noun, it can be a subject or an object. Well, so can a gerund. Let's look over here again. If an infinitive can be a subject, can we switch an infinitive here? I think we can. To swim is my favorite sport. It doesn't sound right, does it? But it is. Because an infinitive can act like a subject, just like a gerund can. And here's a little hint for you. If you ever see a gerund acting like a subject, you can always switch it out with an infinitive. They can always switch out. Well, you see, an infinitive can also be an object. What you don't see here is that it can't be the object of a preposition, because the word to acts like a preposition sometimes. So even though a gerund can be a subject, an object, and an object of a preposition, when an infinitive is acting like a noun, it can only do these first 2 things. So if you're looking here, can you put an infinitive there? Yes, you can. I like to swim. I like swimming. I really like swimming. I really like to swim. They're both the same. They're both correct. So when an infinitive is a noun, it could be either one of these things. But here are the other 2 things infinitives can do. Infinitives can act like adjectives or adverbs in a sentence. Let's look at that sentence the first one is in. I have plans to visit Texas next week. What's the verb? Did you say to visit? No, no, no. Infinitives are never acting like the verb. Where's the verb? I have. What's the subject? I. I have what? I have plans. So plans is a noun. And the rest of the sentence is what we call an infinitive phrase. Remember what a phrase is? A phrase is a group of words, but it doesn't have its own subject and verb. It's just a group of words. So now you're seeing that an infinitive can be in a phrase. Gerunds can too. I'll show you those sentences in a minute. So this is how we mark it. And if it's acting like an adjective, it's describing a noun. What noun is it describing? The one right before it. So that's how an infinitive can act like an adjective. Well, let's look at this. Remember what adverbs do? Adverbs can describe verbs, adjectives, or other adverbs. So let's look at this sentence. He is able to swim a long distance. Verb. To swim is not the verb. Is. Who is? He is. What is he? Able. Able is an adjective describing him. Well, how able is he? He is able to swim a long distance. That infinitive phrase is describing the adjective able. Anything that describes an adjective is an adverb. So this is how we mark it. So this is an example of when an infinitive acts like a noun, as a subject or an object, as an adjective or an adverb. So next I want to show you a few sentence examples of these grammars. You see before you some examples of the gerund phrase or the infinitive phrase. These are included in the handout file on this DVD. But I wanted to show you what it looks like when a gerund is in a phrase or an infinitive is in a phrase in a sentence. Let's look at number 1 on the gerund phrase. Keeping a light on in the house discourages robbers. Did you find the verb first? That's right, discourages. What discourages robbers? Keeping a light on in the house. That whole phrase starts with a gerund, keeping, but the whole phrase together is acting like the subject of the sentence. So that's what a gerund phrase looks like when it's acting like a subject. Look at number 2. Mrs. Jones enjoys playing bridge. What's the verb? Enjoys. No, playing is not part of the verb. Who enjoys? Mrs. Jones enjoys what? What does she enjoy? She enjoys playing bridge. Playing bridge is the object. It's the thing she enjoys. The gerund is playing, and it's in a phrase. So this gerund phrase is acting like the object of the sentence. Look at number 4. Standing during a 2-hour meeting is not my idea of fun. What is the verb? Be careful. Is. That little word in the middle. Is not my idea of fun. What is not my idea of fun? Standing during a 2-hour meeting. That's the gerund phrase. And it's acting like the subject of a sentence. Let's move over to the infinitive phrase. To be objective in my decision is hard. What's the verb? Is. I think you're catching on to this. What is hard? To be objective in my decision. Now remember, when an infinitive is a subject, well, it can switch out with a gerund. Can you say, Being objective in my decision is hard. Yes, that's also correct. But what about number 1 on the gerund phrase? That's a subject. Can I switch it out with an infinitive? Keeping a light on in the house discourages robbers. Can I say, to keep a light on in the house discourages robbers? Yes, that's also correct. So look at number 2 on the infinitive phrase. It's a question. Does Joan have enough money to buy lunch? Verb, does have. Joan does have. What does she have? Enough money. Enough? How much is enough? Enough to buy lunch. So that's where an infinitive is describing the adjective enough. So these 2 sets of sentences are in the file on this DVD. You can print these out and you can practice them yourself. After you have learned all your English verbs, which we did on this DVD, we learned all the active and the passive verbs. So when you have learned those, then it's time to look at this. I learned that some of my students really like to have a formula when they're learning even grammar. So I made all of the 20 tenses, the 20 verbs, active and passive, into a formula for you. At the top you see the be verbs. Am, is, are, was, were, will be. And then in the middle you have, has, had, will have. Those 2 sections cover all 20 of the verb forms of English, the verb tenses, active and passive. So you see what I did for you. After a be verb, verb 4 is active. After a be verb, verb 3 is passive. And after have, has, had, remember I taught you the rule? Every time you see that, active or passive, verb 3 comes after those 3 verbs. And then I gave you some examples on the other side. Then, after that, I showed you about do, does, and did. Of course, do, does, and did, they can be active verbs by themselves. We can say, he did a good job. We do our work every day. But when we use do, does, did with a verb 1, we only use it with action verbs to ask questions or make negative statements or to make an emphasis. So I gave you some examples of that over there too. And then at the bottom I showed you the general rules for modals. I mentioned most of these during the DVD, but I gave you a summary of it here on the handout. After a modal, verb 1, first rule. So after modals, only present tenses. And when you're trying to make a modal passive, we're still in the present tenses, but there's only 2 ways to do it. Modal be with verb 3, like might be written, or modal have been and verb 3, like might have been written. That's the only ways to make modals passive. Well, there you have it. Making grammar easy. I just explained to you some of the handouts that are available. I hope you've gone through that file and can use as much as you'd like. Good luck.